Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the SkyHouse to discuss a little bit about nutrition for your health, wellness, and fitness. I'd like to thank Evan for inviting me for this presentation and opportunity to speak with you all. And thank you to Tough Fitness, of course. I had the opportunity to come out last night and work out with a few of you. And I look forward to talking to you more about how nutrition can have an influence on your health, wellness, and fitness. I'm JLucas, and I'm a registered dietitian. I'm originally from Connecticut. You might ask, how did I end up here in Dallas, Texas? But I've been here for about 2 years now, and I am a Cowboys fan, just in case anybody was wondering.
You can stay.
Not a Patriots fan. Ultimately, I basically worked in the oncology setting for about 5 years and worked a lot with patients, helping them with improving their outcomes. Worked for Yale Hospital for about 5 years in that setting. I also have my master's in exercise physiology, and I'm also a certified specialist in sports dietetics. So ultimately, I'm here to answer any questions you might have, provide you with some guidance around how food and nutrition can help to influence your health, your fitness, and your performance while you're working out in the gym. So please don't be shy. Come forward, ask questions as we're going through the presentations, and I look forward to responding and answering them to the best of my abilities. All right. So the topics that I basically will cover will be around macronutrients, which are your carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Those are our main nutritional sources that we consume on a daily basis. Secondarily, we'll talk about the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, which are the components that play a role in how our bodies utilize those macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then we'll talk about managing the variables, such as sleep, alcohol, and exercise, which can have an influence on our macronutrient and our micronutrient intake. So first, I'd like to talk about the basics of nutrition. I think in today's society, we have a lot of different nutritional pieces and components coming at us. Can anybody tell me some popular diet trends that you've heard of, or maybe one that you may follow?
Paleo.
Paleo diet? Atkins. Ketogenic.
Gluten-free.
Gluten-free. Absolutely. You name it, there's a lot of different diets that are out there. My goal is to provide you with guidance so that when you're going through these different nutritional regimens you're eating on a daily basis, you have greater awareness as to what to choose for your personal goals and needs. So I put this quote up here: don't start a diet with an expiration date, focus on a lifestyle that will last forever. So ultimately, you want to try to follow a plan that you can follow for a lifetime. Many trends we see kind of fall by the wayside. A certain type of diet, low carb, maybe someone might follow it, to lose weight before a wedding or something of that nature. But it's not something that you can sustain and follow for the rest of your life, because fruits taste great, bread tastes great, pasta, rice, and so forth. So we'll talk about the 6 food groups. We need these in order to support life, function, to be able to extrapolate the vitamins and minerals that are necessary for supporting life. So we have protein, fruits, vegetables, oils, grains, and dairy. So first we'll start out with carbohydrates. Can anyone name some carbohydrate foods for me? Some of your favorite foods that are carbohydrate based? Bread. What's that? Pasta. Rice.
Where do you put beans in that list of 6?
Oh, the beans
Legumes, yeah.
would fall under, say, your grain or kind of carbohydrate food source, a grain.
Like, what about just vegetables?
Oh, vegetables, sure.
Like, they have carbs.
Oh yeah, there's some carbs in vegetables as well. We'll talk about that as we go forward. Like corn, for example, is a vegetable. You have other vegetable sources that have a little bit of carbs, like your non-starchy vegetables, which we'll talk about that as well. So let's look into a little bit of the basic science of carbohydrates. Generally, we want to have energy balance, right? And the foods that we consume provide a certain amount of calories per serving. So with carbohydrates, it provides 4 calories per gram. I see that my man is drinking a beverage right there. Can you tell me how many grams of carb are listed on that nutrition fact?
8.
8 grams of carbohydrate, right? So if you have 8 grams of carbohydrate and there's 4 calories per gram, how many total calories is it providing you?
4 calories per gram. 32.
32, absolutely. So this is a number that you can keep in mind so that when you're consuming calories, you'll be able to make an assessment for how much energy is providing you. We know that we have simple and complex carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are also made up of sugars, starches, and fiber. I particularly underline the fiber because that's where we obtain a lot of the healthy nutritional benefits. That's where we are able to get that digestive health piece and where we should be focusing when it comes to carbohydrate consumption. Carbohydrates are also the major source of fuel for the brain, the nervous system, and the muscles. Anybody know what the storage form of carbohydrate is in the body? What it's called?
Glucose.
Glucose is the form that we ingest, and when it's in the muscle, it's called glycogen, right? We have a limited amount of glycogen that we can store in our muscles, our liver, and within our other organs. So ultimately, when there's an abundance of it, at times, it can have that notion that it might lead to weight gain, but it's not as easy as we might assume. But we'll talk about how abundant carbohydrates are in our diet and how managing that intake is important for weight maintenance over time. And we know that insulin is one of the main hormones that's necessary for storing carbohydrates into the body. So when you think about disease states such as diabetes, it's really a matter of if, say, a type 1 diabetic is not producing enough insulin from their pancreas, so their blood sugars may go elevated because the insulin is acting as a signal to put carbohydrate into the cell, like the muscle. Secondarily, when you have type 2 diabetes, it's not that insulin isn't working, it's that the cells, like the muscle tissue, which is the majority of where glucose is stored at, into glycogen, the muscle tissue can't recognize insulin. So when that patient, has a lot of weight gain, the body's pumping insulin to try to get the carbs into the muscle cell, but because the muscle is covered up with fat, there's insulin desensitivity. The body cannot see the insulin, so the carbs never get into the muscle tissue. I know that this is in the diabetic class, or maybe we don't have diabetes here, but it's important to understand that type of physiology because with exercise, what happens is naturally you have an increase in insulin that occurs right after exercise, which is why when we're looking at, say, consumption of carbohydrate foods, I like to recommend consuming it right after your exercise session because you then have a greater probability of storing carbs in the muscle cells and reducing that insulin resistance over time. Does that make sense? All right. So carbohydrate foods, we talked about some of our favorite carbohydrate foods, but we recognize that it's significantly abundant in today's society. We find that there's cereal, oatmeal, breads, crackers, cakes, pasta, rice, beans, tortillas, bananas, apples, grapes, oranges, spaghetti, french fries, potatoes, plantains, chips, soda, juices, corn, popcorn, candy, waffles, pancakes, the list goes on. It's not that carbs are bad, it's just that we have so much of them that whenever we're eating, it's hard to kind of manage the intake of that. So our calorie intake becomes overabundant when it looks at this particular category. We also want to look at which carbs we're choosing. Not all carbs are bad, it's a matter of choosing the ones that are more wholesome, that are going to provide you with more vitamins, minerals, and particularly fiber. Fruits, particularly, is one that I significantly suggest for reducing disease risk. And then secondarily, you have your whole grains, perhaps maybe oatmeal, or some other rich carbohydrate sources that are going to give you more fiber to keep you full and support digestive health over time. So we have starches such as potatoes, dry beans, peas, corn, bread, cereals, and grains. Those are the richest source of carbohydrates that you may obtain from your diet. From a dietary fiber perspective, who knew that there's 2 different types of fiber? Can anyone name them?
I'm just laughing because it says understood.
Oh yeah, sure. Pull it up.
Soluble and soluble?
Soluble and insoluble fiber. Fiber is a very powerful nutritional component. We find that the insoluble fiber comes from, say, the husk of a fruit or a grain. Like an apple, the skin may have a greater percentage of insoluble fiber. It's what causes the bulk in your digestive tract. Then we have soluble fiber, which is kind of that moist component of, say, a fruit or a vegetable, like applesauce would be a good example. But you can't necessarily isolate one from the other when we're looking at nature. They're going to be combined together. For example, an apple, I just mentioned the skin, but then I mentioned applesauce. So you'll get insoluble and soluble. And these are components that are going to help with reducing risk for disease over time, particularly reducing the risk for cancer. And when I was working in the oncology setting for disease states such as prostate or breast cancer, I would often suggest a high fiber diet after treatment. You know, for prostate it's a little different, you get some GI distress. But ultimately, that helps with capturing any toxins that may lie within the GI tract to extrapolate them and excrete it from the body so it doesn't build up over time. Then, of course, we have our whole grains and our refined grains. I like to say that all grains can fit into your diet. Make half your grains whole grain. And we find that the whole grains consist of that which contains the endosperm, which is the whole kernel of the grain itself, with the germ, endosperm, with the germ and the endosperm, which is where all the B vitamins and all the rich nutrients come from. Secondarily, refined grains, that's those processed grains that taste delicious, where they basically break down the kernel, you know, strip away those nutrients, and then sometimes they fortify it back with some vitamins. But we want to be mindful of how much we're consuming of those foods because they're usually void of the things we need to help us thrive. This is a little picture of what that whole kernel looks like. So not to go into all the science of it, but it gives you some good nutrients like essential fatty acids, B vitamins, fiber, etc. Someone mentioned gluten yesterday. I'd like to make an assessment for what you all have interest for. Anyone here gluten intolerant? All right. So we have one. And with that, what types of foods do you avoid to help reduce that GI distress? Is there anything you can tell us about it from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, mine was just caused from stomach aches that I had every 3 days, every week, pretty much. And so I cut out gluten when I was a junior in college, and it's changed my life completely. Yes, so I just avoid wheat or any sort of grain of any kind. I just eat, I don't eat a whole lot, but when I do eat it, it's like corn tortillas instead, or gluten-free bread, and quinoa, pasta, and stuff like that.
Awesome. Okay. So generally, if we find out some gluten intolerance may come up, there's adjustments that you can make to still obtain those nutrients from carbohydrate sources. And I'll put a little information up here about what gluten is if anyone was interested, but it's basically 2 different types of protein that are found in that carbohydrate source, particularly a gliadin and a gluten, which can sometimes be intolerable for some individuals. So, as you mentioned, some of the gluten-free foods would be rice, all varieties, buckwheat, quinoa, corn, millet, etc. Just a quick little run over on gluten-free to cover all ground. But it's basically within the GI tract, your body is recognizing it as a foreign substance, so you get that inflammation that will occur in that distress because the body's recognizing it as a foreign substance. Generally though, many people are going gluten-free. It's a matter of kind of distinguishing between it being a trend and it actually being something that you should remove from your diet because it's an actual intolerance. But ultimately, only 1% of Americans have celiac disease, where really reducing gluten is important for management of that particular condition. And about 15% of Americans have a gluten intolerance. We know generally what the symptoms are: GI distress, bloating, intolerance. It can lead to malnutrition if it's not managed appropriately. So now we'll move on to fruits.
Just a question on that. I used to work with people that follow whatever kind of, I don't know, gluten-free or one of those types of diets, but I remember one of them accidentally had like some gluten or something like that in one of their meals, you know, out of the restaurant, and it made her very sick.
Oh yeah.
So is that like that gluten intolerance going to be, if you cut it all out and then reintroduce it, I guess does your body kind of get used to having it and then when you cut it out?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I'll be
Well, yeah. Generally, that what you mentioned, I can see what you mean as far as someone avoiding gluten for a long period of time because they had an actual true intolerance, and then perhaps maybe when they're at a restaurant they accidentally consume something made with gluten products, which is something that restaurants should be very mindful of. And it's kind of similar to what I think of perhaps with, say, milk-based products. If you're avoiding them for a while, you know, your body actually stops making that enzyme lactase.
Okay.
So when you drink milk, your intolerance to the product is going to be significant. You know, stay away from that person.
It makes the intolerance.
We gotta go home. They're probably feeling sick.
Yeah, it makes the intolerance worse.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, generally, I know what you mean with that. If they're avoiding it for a while, then they reintroduce it, then it could definitely cause problems.
Would that happen to someone that's not intolerant?
Well, if it,
Shouldn't happen.
yeah, it shouldn't, right? If someone's not intolerant to it, generally, if they're eating gluten, you've probably been eating it for a while, and you would know if something wasn't right. You know, if
Yeah.
you're eating some of those foods I mentioned, oats, etc., and you're like, oh wait, this is not feeling right for me. Then something was going wrong there. So fruits in general, fruits of course we know are abundant, or it should be something that we consume a lot of per se. How many fruits did you eat yesterday? Can anyone tell me? 3 servings? 4 servings? That's excellent. That's greater than what the average is. We want to make sure that fruits are abundant in our diet. Some are higher carbs. They can all fit within, but be mindful of the carbohydrate content. Bananas are going to give you about 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrate for medium to large. Mangoes are going to be a higher concentrated carbohydrate source. Papaya, 30 grams for a serving. Pears have about 22 grams with a lot of that insoluble and soluble fiber. You know, when you eat pears, kind of like pretty rough. Pineapple, 3 thick slices gives you about 30 grams of carbohydrate. Raisins, 2 tablespoons, about 15 grams. Some of the lower carb fruits are your berries, which is something I love to consume personally. They're going to be your lower carbohydrate containing fruits. Apples, melons, apricots, cherries. In general, make sure you're aiming for 3 servings a day if possible. This is going to be a powerful preventive measure for reducing your risk for disease. And it also has rich antioxidants and vitamin C to help support your health. Any comments on fruits? Pretty simple, right?
Oh, what about watermelon?
Watermelon? Yep, I had that on here as well.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. So watermelon, a cup is about 12 grams. It's very rich in water. So, great for summertime, to help support your hydration and your energy levels. So after workout, perhaps might be great.
Okay, I'm sometimes a bad audience member.
It's all good. I like
What
to
about
interact.
So eating fruit versus like putting it in a blender?
Sure.
Is
Well,
the same, one survey is equivalent or like?
it's still the same, but what you should be mindful of is that you may have a probability to increase the carbohydrate content because you're reducing the volume of the fruit itself. So generally say if you eat, say like, strawberries or like blueberries, like the actual wholesome consumption of it, it's work that you're doing, chewing, it's effort, you swallow it, you're feeling yourself get full. But when you put it in a blender, not that it's bad, because it actually enhances the nutrient recognition by the body, because you're increasing the surface area of the fruit, so the enzymes can see it and digest it. But what's happening is, you're breaking it down, so you might consume more of the product. But there's nothing wrong with doing that, though. I recommend a combination of the two, fresh or frozen.
Is it true that, when you, blend a smoothie, you don't consume as much nutrients as you would if you just consume it?
Well, I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. I would actually think that blending it up would potentially enhance the potential nutrient
Maybe
extraction.
she's thinking like they don't use fresh fruit. Do they use fresh fruit? Or do they use canned stuff?
Well, I just go with fresh fruits.
Sure.
Well, then it should,
Yeah, it shouldn't make a difference, right? Yeah, I mean, whether you're taking it from a wholesome and consuming it here or blending it, like I mentioned, blending it can help enhance the surface area of the fruit to help your body with digesting it. You're pre-digesting it, so that helps with uptake. Awesome. Vegetables. This one here is the most important. We always hear about vegetables being very important for consumption, for reducing risk for disease. I'm particularly a advocate of consuming more non-starchy vegetables, which I've provided a list here to the left. We see that for the carbohydrate energy content, it's about 5 grams of carb per serving. How many calories is that? 20 calories, right? For a half a cup, that's nothing. So generally when we're looking at weight management, which with weight management, that's significant for reducing your risk for disease, consuming more of the non-starchy vegetables is significant. So we see from a non-starchy vegetable perspective, choosing things like asparagus, tomatoes, spinach, squash, peppers, carrots, etc.
Is there a difference between like cooked and raw?
Cooked and raw? Well, generally, it depends. Some vegetables, if you cook them, it can enhance the nutrients availability. But at times you have to be mindful because if you overcook the vegetable, then you can destroy the nutrients. So there's a lot of kind of controversy as far as like raw vegetables are best, versus cooked. I recommend consuming a combination of the two of them, to help with enhancing nutrient uptake. Great question. And then on the other side, we have those starchy vegetables, which is the piece where we want to be more mindful of as far as how much, because when we look at the carbohydrate content, it has about 3 grams more carbohydrate per gram compared to the non-starchy. So say with corn, half a cup, 15 grams, half a cup is nothing. When we recognize serving sizes, say at a restaurant, we're probably getting like 2 cups of a serving, or a cup of corn, or sweet potato, for example. Not that it's a bad food, but it's going to give you 60 grams for an average size. Even a regular potato will give you 60 grams. So how many calories is that? 60? 240. 240, right? Versus only 20 calories. So if we're looking at weight management, weight loss over time, we want to reduce the serving sizes on the carbohydrate starchy end, and then incorporate more non-starchy.
So on this list, is there anything that you try to hit, like something that you would consider superior? So in your diet, you're trying to hit it, weekly on the
Sure.
list? What were
Well, generally, when we look at superiority of the vegetable, we want to look at the color of the vegetable. So the darker the vegetable, the more nutrients that it may have. But at the same time, cauliflower, for example, has significant phytonutrients that can help support health as well. So it's really about adding a variety and incorporating the rainbow with those vegetables in order to extrapolate all of the nutrient potential that it can offer. Awesome. So ultimately, fruits and vegetables combined are important. Reason being is because it contains that potassium, dietary fiber, vitamin C, folic acid to help reduce the risk for disease. We should be aiming for about 5 to 13 servings per day of those food choices. I can tell you personally that I don't eat enough fruits and vegetables at times, but I do an internal check here and there, and I'll say, all right, breakfast, I usually always put some vegetables with breakfast, spinach in my eggs, or peppers, onions, tomatoes. Then lunchtime I'll look, wait a minute, I just have protein shake and a protein bar, hold on, I like protein, but let's incorporate some other fruits and vegetables to keep myself in line.
What's considered a serving then?
Serving size would be half a cup cooked, 1 cup raw or fresh.
Do you believe in any supplements? That
Absolutely.
Would, okay, go ahead.
Oh, in relation to
Vegetables.
vegetables? Well, I believe that you can extrapolate some of the benefits from the supplement, but you won't get all of what nature has intended by consuming the supplement alone. You'll find that a lot of times they're like maybe the dried green powders. So you'll get vitamins, minerals, but you may not get the fiber that the product provides. Or you might not get the water that it provides. Water is the most important supplement, for our bodies to function right.
Yes, but there are other ways to get water and fiber. You know what I mean? Like to spike your diet with vegetables,
Sure.
you can't get
Sure,
idea.
sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. I definitely agree that supplements can be something that can be incorporated to make up for those potential deficiencies.
Because, I just think that servings per day are great, but if they're not, it's not reasonable. If no one's gonna get 13 servings a day, then it doesn't matter if you need 13 servings a day.
Sure. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Supplements, I'm definitely an advocate of incorporating where there might be, say, a deficiency or a lack. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well for, like, say, protein. A lot of times there might be a difficulty meeting those protein needs, especially if you're exercising. So that's where supplementation comes in.
But does it matter if you stagger it through the day? Cause like, I eat a really huge salad, which my guess is around probably 8 to 10 servings.
And it doesn't
When I
matter.
think about like the size of it, like, so if I'm consuming it all at one time,
Sure.
does that matter, or do I need to stagger it?
It still counts towards your total servings per day.
Or like protein, for example, like they say that you need to have that consistently throughout the day.
Sure.
So,
Definitely, that's important because if you're able to, say, spread the protein out throughout the day, depending on what your goal is, especially say for like muscle building, spreading your protein out is going to continually provide the muscle in the body with protein at various times throughout the day. We'll talk a little bit more about protein, but the reason why it's good to spread your protein intake out is because protein is the only nutrient that's not actually stored in the body. It's a continual cyclic storage and release of amino acids. So when you take protein in, it goes in the bloodstream, and then it has to be rich in a specific amino acids. We'll talk about this. This is my favorite topic, actually.
It shows.
Right. So what happens is when you eat specific amino acids, the body needs these specific ones in order to stimulate uptake into the muscle. But then once it takes them up into the muscle, when you don't consume anything, what happens is there can be other organs that say, hey, I need some protein over here. But you didn't eat any protein, muscle, let me get some amino acids. All right, here you go. Now it's going in the bloodstream, so if you're trying to build muscle, you won't be able to optimize on it because you're not spreading protein out throughout the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would also say to your question that the more you can combine nutrients per meal, the greater the chance of absorption will be, because there are complementary reactions among nutrients. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. That's something that I was going to add as well. For example, vitamin D, which is necessary for like muscle function. You want to spread your intake out and have a variety of foods throughout the day because, say for example, you need to incorporate some fat in your diet in order to extrapolate vitamin D and absorb it from your gut. So is that
Potassium is another good example. Calcium is another example. When you complement it,
Absolutely. Great. I love the discussion. Let's keep it going. So fruits and vegetables is one. We talked about the benefits of incorporating a significant amount to support your overall health and reduce risk for disease. Here are some of those phytochemicals. When you look at fruits or vegetables, it has these specific phytochemicals. For example, lutein, which helps with reducing macular degeneration for eye health, and it can be found in, say, collard greens, for example. You also have lycopene, which is important for, say, men's health and reducing prostate cancer. Those dark red, rich vegetables like tomatoes, for example, sun-dried tomatoes, even ketchup has lycopene. So that's just a quick little list to help you recognize some of those benefits. Now we'll get into the real discussion. My favorite topic, which is protein. So protein basically provides the building blocks for supporting enzymes, hormones, vitamins, bones, muscle, of course, cartilage, skin, and blood. It provides 4 calories per gram. Does that sound familiar? Same amount as carbohydrate. Contains B vitamins, vitamin E, iron, zinc, and magnesium. High protein diets support weight loss by reducing energy intake, improving appetite, and controlling satiety, the feeling of fullness, while subsequently reducing body weight and fat mass while preserving lean mass. So we're going to look at some specific case study, or a case study, where high protein, I'm talking about high protein, more than what we would usually hear, has shown significant benefit for improving lean body mass and in reducing fat mass. So we'll take a look at that. So protein foods, this is probably the most controversial piece that we see in America right now between animal-based or plant-based. Incorporating either one is important for supporting those functions that we mentioned. So animal-based, you have your meats, your poultry, your fish, your eggs, and your dairy. Plant-based, we have soy, like tofu, legumes, nuts, seeds, grains, and then it's also found in some fruits and vegetables. We'll look at the specific amount of some of these food sources in a moment. So here we have the amount of protein per gram when looking at, say, an animal-based protein versus a plant-based. So for example, when we look at beans, for half a cup, it has about 6 grams of protein. And when we look at, say, like a animal-based protein, such as, let's look at chicken. It's gotta be on here, some poultry.
It's up there.
Oh. 3 ounces is 21 grams. So we know that we're gonna get more grams of protein per serving in an animal-based versus a plant-based. Now, looking at distribution, we talked about that a little bit, and this is a little picture that kind of demonstrates why you want to try to optimize on protein intake throughout the day. There's a particular zone where maximal protein synthesis occurs, where your body is able to take protein and utilize those amino acids to incorporate it into tissue to help support the muscle or maintenance of the tissue. This is something that's really near and dear to my heart because working with the oncology patient, one of my main objectives with them would be maintenance of muscle. It's so significant because when you lose muscle tissue, it can increase complications, it increases morbidity, and it increases mortality. So I really stress with those patients, adequate protein intake, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Generally, what we see in this picture is that between, say, about 25 to 35 grams of protein, that's where maximum protein synthesis takes place. And you want to have about 30 grams per meal at a minimum, that's what I would suggest, to help with maintenance of muscle and supporting your appetite throughout the day. As opposed to, this is probably the typical American pattern. Breakfast, the protein content is usually minimal. We usually have like cereal, bagels, donuts, etc., more carbohydrate-based foods with very little protein content. And then lunch, a little bit more protein, maybe chicken with salad or something like that, small serving. And then dinner, that's when we're like so hungry because we didn't really eat enough protein, during breakfast and lunch. That we're like, 2 servings of chicken? Let me get an 8-ounce steak? Etc. But our body's not really efficiently utilizing that high amount of protein at that one time. So generally, we also want to look at calorie content of the protein foods that we're choosing and see how we should make a balance with our intake based upon the content in those particular food sources. So for example, peanut butter has protein, but in order to get, say, that 25 gram amount, you gotta eat like 7 tablespoons of peanut butter. Not that that's bad, it's just that calorie balance is the key when we're looking at weight changes. Same thing about beans, they're great, but you gotta eat 3.5 cups of beans to get to 25 grams of protein. Same with the others, we get it. Next up, from a supplemental standpoint, whey protein is something that's very commonly utilized. It's probably one of the top nutritional supplements items that people use to support muscle building. And generally, it comes from milk. It is the highest biological value-based protein. It's 15% higher than eggs. It's a very fast-acting protein source. I recommend perhaps using it after your workout, or maybe you can use it during breakfast if you haven't had a lot of protein sources. And it helps with recovery after exercise, reducing muscle soreness, etc. And this here kind of gives a diagram as far as biological value, how your body's using it. That's what biological value indicates. And we see that whey has very high biological value overall. When I'm thinking about protein, I'm thinking about leucine. Anyone familiar with leucine? Leucine, it's an essential amino acid. I didn't talk a lot about amino acids, but generally for protein, you have essential meaning needed for life and cannot be created by the body. It's needed from the diet. And then you have non-essential amino acids. But when we're looking at essential amino acids, there's 9 of them in total, I believe. And the leucine is the one that I'm always looking for when I'm eating food sources. The reason being is because without leucine, muscle protein synthesis does not occur. And you need to have a certain amount of leucine in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So, for example, when we're looking at certain food sources, whey protein has about 12% leucine per serving. That's probably why it has that high biological value. When we're talking about eating, say, different foods throughout the day, what can happen is, say if you don't eat a food that has a lot of leucine in it because it's the captain. I call it the captain of all amino acids. What happens when you eat protein foods, those amino acids appear in the bloodstream, but if there's no leucine, they're gonna kind of sit around like, they wonder what I'm gonna do, where I'm going. They don't have anyone to direct them. So what happens is when you eat foods rich in leucine, it says, all right, let's go. Protein synthesis, let's get into muscle tissue and start making muscle cells. Let's take these amino acids and put it into the muscle tissue. So we need to have a minimum of 2.5 grams in order to stimulate that process. And we can see here that it can be extrapolated from foods, but in various amounts. It kind of goes back to the biological value that I shared with you in the last slide. This slide here I took from the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Dr. Antonio is the president, and they recently had a presentation where I noted some slides that were pretty significant when looking at protein and a particular case study. So here is a 1-year study in trained women looking at, is protein bad? Because sometimes people are like, oh, protein's bad. There's a lot of controversy and arguments about it, right? So they wanted to do a case study and see what exactly would happen if they increase protein significantly. Here, what they see is that there's an athlete, 46-year-old, 5'7", 140 pounds, elite endurance. She's only 8.3% body fat by body fat. The 34-year-old athlete is a physique competitor, 5'3", 134 pounds. She's 14.9% body fat, which that's kind of crazy to me. I'm like, 14.9, she looks ripped compared to this athlete there. But secondarily, at baseline, the physique athlete was taking in 2.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. We can do a little math later, but basically you take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, and then multiply it by the amount of protein suggested. Say for like a 70 kilogram individual, if they were to do 2 grams, that's about 140 grams of protein. She went to 4.8 grams of protein per kilogram, which is nuts, right? No one recommends that amount. Kidney failure is on the way, right? That's what we hear. The dual athlete was taking 1.6 grams of protein, went up to 3.2, right? That's also very significant. What happened? The endurance athlete, from a body composition perspective, fat loss, 2.5 pounds of fat loss. The physique athlete lost almost 2 pounds of fat. That's crazy. Ultimately, they also found out there was no effect on bone health. Sometimes that's another kind of controversial piece around protein. And for their lean body mass, there was no change. They didn't necessarily increase the lean mass or decrease, but they did lose fat. And I think what it comes down to is when you're eating the protein, it keeps you full for a longer period of time, and it also limits the amount of foods that you might want to eat and replace them. So carbohydrates, fats, etc. are going to be eliminated from the diet. So that might be some of the mechanisms around it, in addition to what they call the thermic effect of food, which means it takes more energy to break down that protein versus, say, like a carbohydrate source. Any comments, questions about protein?
What's your recommended amount, max, per meal in protein?
Max?
Like, if you say stop at 30 grams, which is the recommended amount, like what's the max, like 40, 50, 60?
Well, generally, there was
You got protein shakes that say like 60 grams per serving and stuff like that, so that's what I was asking.
Sure. I think when we're looking at how it might be utilized for incorporation of, say, lean body mass, 40 grams might be the optimal amount. But at the same time, when we're looking at the research around how a high protein diet can affect the changes in body composition where you're losing more fat mass, perhaps going up to 60 grams of protein might be okay, if that's something that you ultimately are aiming for. I don't recognize that there's any particular risk per se as far as like kidney health or maybe gaining more weight, especially when we're looking at research, just a little small case study example where these individuals had a loss in their fat mass. But you also want to be mindful about the distribution of the protein intake. For example, say if you were to consume 40 to 60 grams of protein during breakfast, that might be beneficial to support your intake throughout the day and help with reducing total calorie intake. And then when looking at exercise, this one was a very key one because in the past, they used to say really maximally after exercise was 25 grams is enough to stimulate protein synthesis. But when they did that study, they did it on an isolated exercise with leg extension or something of that nature. And that was enough to maximally stimulate leg protein synthesis. But then they did another study recently where they did a full body workout, which would be similar to what we do in society. And they gave them 40 grams and they noted a higher increase in muscle protein synthesis versus that 20 gram dose. So I'm a proponent of increasing protein. And for myself personally, since I've seen this research lately, I've been crushing protein personally, and I've seen myself lean out even more.
So what's your goal in terms of grams of protein per day?
For myself?
Yes.
I don't necessarily calculate it, but I would say minimum 1 gram per pound of body weight, and I weigh 174 pounds.
Okay.
So if you wanted to increase, it'd be 1.5
1.5
grams.
grams per kilogram?
Yeah.
Per pound.
Per
Pound of body weight.
Oh yeah, we can do that. That could work. One other key thing too, I was going to mention quickly, which was like one of the most powerful pieces that I've read recently about protein, casein protein. You were mentioning earlier that you had some cottage cheese. Well, in a recent publication that was published by the International Society for Nutrition, they looked at casein dosage at 30 to 40 grams before bed, and they found that it didn't have any effect on lipolysis, which is the ability to break down fat by the body, but it supported lean body mass. That's like mind-blowing to me. But yeah, casein protein is another piece. We didn't talk a lot about that. But for younger individuals, they suggest that the casein might be better because the metabolism might be higher. So with whey, as we mentioned, it goes into your body so quick, it's used up and taken up quickly. But casein is a slow digester, so it may help with supporting muscle protein synthesis for a longer time because those amino acids are continually in the bloodstream to support uptake.
When it mixes with water, it's just like balloons out, right?
Yeah.
It makes you really full.
Yeah, I drank some casein last night, actually. I was working on this, and it helped me out a little bit, but then I got hungrier. I was like, I need a protein bar, so I ate a protein bar. Side note. So,
I used to, when I was like most on top of my game, working out, and I've always kind of worked out in the evening, but I found a really good tasting casein protein, and it was like a cinnamon roll or something. And so every evening, whenever I got a sweet tooth or something after dinner, I'd knock out like a cinnamon roll protein shake. And honestly, it literally tasted so good that it was almost as good as any kind of dessert. And then it kept me full throughout the night. And I realized like while my body was recovering, while all of that hard work that I did was like doing its thing within my body, I knew it was being kind of trickle charged with protein throughout the night. And because there was times like I would wake up in the middle of the night hungry, just from training so often.
Absolutely.
And casein was like the only thing that got me through. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, we'll keep it moving. Time check. It's about 11:30, and just a little bit more material to cover. Fats. Same principle applies. You have your essential fatty acids. That's what we want to consume more of versus say those non-essential fat components. Things like omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, etc. Those are very powerful food sources that help to support, say, heart health. We probably hear that a lot, right? In the news, eat plenty of fish like salmon, for example. The thing about fat though is that it is energy rich. It provides 9 calories per gram, so much more compared to say the carbs or the protein. But incorporating fat, say during breakfast, can be beneficial for supporting your say goal throughout the day if you're looking to burn more fat. There was a research study showing that when the breakfast was higher in fat and adequate in protein versus being higher in carbohydrate, there was a greater probability that you would burn more fat throughout the day if the breakfast was higher in fat.
Well, that's why I was saying cottage cheese, banana, and strawberries. You know, you get two fruits, and you're getting this protein plus the casein,
Absolutely. Yep.
which maybe sustain you for a while.
Absolutely. And the casein also has fat in it as well. So, yep. All those
You
pieces.
haven't mentioned nuts and seeds very much.
The nuts and the seeds, yeah, I didn't mention a lot about that, but that will fall into the, say, protein category, and also for fats as well. And I think I have a little bit of that in the slides coming up. But ultimately, from a good fat perspective, these are the ones we want to choose more of, like your virgin olive oil, macadamia nuts, almonds, and this side more so than anything, especially the omega-3s as mentioned, those cold fish products. Vitamins, minerals, these are those pieces that optimize again on the macronutrient content. I'm not going to go into all the details about this, but of course we know things like vitamin D would be the one that's most important for all Americans, and most people have inadequate vitamin D intake and deficiency. We recognize vitamin D as what? Anyone can tell me? Sun exposure, right? That's how we produce 90% of our vitamin D. But what's key though is it has to be a certain time of the day. So between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., that's when the way the rays hit the earth is able to penetrate your skin in a certain way to activate vitamin D. Also the time frame that you're outside. Also you have to look at what kind of clothing you're wearing, cover-ups, even suntan, sun lotion, you know what I mean? That could block vitamin D production.
Right. Hence why you should supplement vitamin D.
Absolutely. Supplemental vitamin D is probably going to be the best option from that perspective. So, omega-3 rich foods, again, we talked a little bit about that. Salmon, tuna, walnuts are also contains omega-3, not as much though, not as much, but it is a good source. Saturated fats, those are the ones we want to avoid more from a heart healthy perspective. Cholesterol, of course, is in that fat category. So, particularly, I'm just going to highlight a couple that are important. Folic acid, we know, is important for supporting red blood cell function, particularly for women and in pregnancy is very important. And in America, we have a lot of fortification of folic acid to reduce spina bifida birth defects. So there's a highlight on that. B vitamins, of course, are found in a lot of the greens that we consume and other foods. Let's get through this. Vitamin D, we talked about some. You'll find vitamin D in foods, but it's usually small amounts, you know, as you mentioned, supplemental intake is important. Calcium, of course. I usually like to emphasize calcium intake for teenagers because that's when you're really optimizing on bone health. But there's other pieces to calcium, such as muscle function, that would be important. Iron, that's a major one. Of course, we'll talk a little bit more about iron foods, especially if, say, you're following more of a plant-based diet, how to extrapolate iron to reduce that risk for anemia. Right. And then vegetarian diets, I did incorporate some information on this as well. Generally, there are many different types of vegetarian diets that one may follow. And generally, vegetarian diets are associated with health advantages, such as reducing your risk for heart disease, reducing blood pressure, and also reducing the risk for type 2 diabetes. There's lacto-ovo-vegetarian, which is a person that eats eggs and dairy but no meat. You have a lacto-vegetarian, which is a person that does not eat meat or eggs but dairy. And then you have a pesco-vegetarian, which is a person that consumes fish but no meat or dairy. And then a vegan is a person who does not eat or use any animal products. Strict vegetarian, a person who excludes all animal products, limiting meat, dairy, eggs, and honey. Generally, a well-planned vegetarian diet can be beneficial, but it's important to be mindful of some of the challenges, such as adequate protein, calcium, vitamin D, iron, zinc, riboflavin, B vitamins such as B12, and omega-3 fatty acids if you're not consuming any cold-boiled fish, for example. So, Generally, from a protein perspective, we kind of talked about that already as far as how you can extrapolate some of the proteins from foods. When we have, say, legumes, half a cup of lentils, that's 9 grams of protein. Your highest source is going to be tempeh at 16 grams of protein for a half cup. Soy milk gives you 8 grams. It can be fortified and say the vitamin B12, so that's something important to consider. We have some nuts down here. I incorporated that. So peanut butter, 2 tablespoons, gives you 7 grams of protein. Almonds. I like to use nuts as a snack. Sometimes during the day if I get hungry, but I don't want to destroy my diet and eat chips, I'll eat a handful of cashews. And that's something I actually learned from Arnold. He told me himself. He told me. I had a chance to meet him one time. But I was reading his book and he said that during his bodybuilding days he would eat cashews if he got hungry. So some pieces to be mindful of, just to conclude from a vegetarian perspective: calcium, vitamin D for bone health, immune function, inflammation modulation, skeletal muscle function. Your iron, be mindful, is needed for oxygenation of tissue. Zinc, for the zinc, the reason why there's more of a risk is because it's more available from animal-based foods, but you can still be able to extrapolate zinc from a vegetarian diet if you're choosing a variety of plant-based foods. Iodine, there's also some discussion that there could be potential deficiency, but if you're using iodine-rich salt, that can help reduce that from occurring. Vitamin B12 is probably one of the biggest pieces. B12 is needed for supporting red blood cell function and reducing anemias, and it's exclusively found in animal products. So, really looking for foods that are fortified with B12 or taking a B12 supplement might be important. There's a few other tips here. We kind of talked about it a little bit as we're going through. From an omega-3 perspective, if it's not being consumed from, say, fish sources, then you can choose those plant-based sources of omega-3 or take an omega-3 supplement. Weight loss, generally, we know the principle with this, it's all about energy balance. At the end of the day, what we want to do is create a greater calorie deficit to induce weight loss versus, say, consuming more calories. And the calorie deficit can be accomplished by what? Anyone tell me? Exercising. Anybody else?
Eating more calories.
And eating less, right? It sounds so simple, excuse me. But yeah, it's so hard for us, I know. But that's the ultimate way. And then for the body composition change, I wanted to put this up here as a piece to be mindful of. A lot of times you might see stuff like 50-pound weight loss in the first week, of the diet. Well, we want to think about what kind of weight are we losing? Water weight, fat mass, muscle mass. And really, when you get out to the 4-week time frame of weight loss, that's when you're losing 85% of your weight is fat. So keep going, keep charging, and recognize that water intake is important. In the first week of your weight loss, you're losing most weight as water. But it's just a little side note I wanted to incorporate. Some other weight loss tips: fill up on lean proteins like grilled chicken, fish, beef, beans, dairy, plenty of whole fruits, vegetables, the non-starchy source. Eat less, move more, drink plenty of water throughout the day. Focus on that high fiber breakfast, high protein breakfast versus a higher carb breakfast. Minimize alcohol intake, reduce intake of juices, sweets, and junk foods. Read the nutrition label. I got mixed up and tongue tied. But yeah, be a smart consumer. When you're choosing your foods, you're all healthy here. This is stuff we need to share with our friends and family. But help them out. If they're willing to learn more. Be a smart consumer. When we shopping, we want to know what we're taking in. Read your nutrition facts. Find out how much protein it has. Find out how much carbohydrates you provide. How much energy is giving your body per serving. I love this one. Use the plate method. This is one of the most simple things you can do to improve your health, wellness, and your fitness. Basically covering half your plate with non-starchy vegetables. Those ones I mentioned earlier: lettuce, tomatoes, onions, peppers, etc. Put them on the far end of your plate in 50%. The other 25% is your grains, like your carbohydrate starches, your beans, etc. That's a quarter of the plate. And then the other quarter should be your protein source. This is something that you should try to follow, say during lunch and dinner. And I feel like it will be very beneficial to support your goals. Sleep deprivation is definitely something that can totally mess up all the macronutrient intake, micronutrient intake, all that healthy good stuff we're talking about. If you're not sleeping well enough, that's going to affect your BMI. They're finding that those who don't sleep sufficiently enough, they have higher BMIs. Reason being is because sleep affects the appetite. When we don't sleep sufficiently, it plays with something known as ghrelin, which is our appetite-stimulating hormone. You all felt that, right? Like, if you didn't sleep enough, you're like, oh, stomach ghrelin, I just ate breakfast, you know? That's the ghrelin. It never had a chance to go back down to normal levels, so you start eating more than you eat. So remember, adequate sleep is a piece to supporting your health and wellness and your fitness as well. Alcohol intake. This is another one where people kind of like disregard it, you know. We're hanging out, we're having fun, it tastes good. It seems like it's just water, but it's contributing to calories as well. So this could be a piece that can give you further support in your goals if you're able to manage it a little bit more and maybe choose some of the beverages that might be lighter, like a vodka with soda. It's the weekend. It's a good choice to potentially make. Exercise, of course, we know is something that we want to incorporate. I recommend putting in your aerobic, which is like your cardio, and your anaerobic, which is your resistance training. You're all good on that, but doing a combination of the both of them helps to optimize on your outcomes for your goals. Of course, you want to stay well hydrated. This is another piece that can have a major effect on your goals, say for weight loss. If you're not staying adequately hydrated, it can affect your body's ability to induce weight loss. Supplements, we'll touch on this a little bit, but I know we're kind of running out of time. We can talk much more about that, say, as a side note. I'm an advocate of supplements, personally. I take like a whole bunch of supplements. I take a multivitamin mixture, a whole fruit vegetable. I take a probiotic, prebiotic, digestive enzyme-based product, protein, branched chain amino acids, creatine. I'm a major fan of creatine. So just some of the ones that I personally take. And I have a green supplement too, but honestly, I use that one. I swear it's been in my cabinet for like 2 years. Every once in a while, I'm like, oh, let me drink some of this. Alright. And then this one here I wanted to throw in here, Inside Tracker. It's a way where you can check your blood levels for nutrients. You can look at your stress levels. You can look at your cortisol, your CRP. You can look at your testosterone. You can look at your sex-binding globulin hormone level, which has an effect on your testosterone. You can look at your calcium level. You can look at your vitamin D levels, etc. They have a full panel, and if you check me out on YouTube, I actually posted up my whole blood results and analyzed every single last one of them. It's like an hour and a half. I'm trying not to talk too much, but there's a lot of information because they have like over 30 different panels that they can check for you. And if you're ever interested in getting your results checked, you can use my code JLucas10 and save 10% on your order. They use this for professional athletes to help you optimizing on performance. So that's what I appreciate that. And last but not least, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at JLucas Nutrition. Always ask me any questions. I have my cards here. You can send me a text message, and I'll do my best to support you with responding and giving you an answer to any nutrition or exercise-related questions that